We're excited to have everyone back here to the First Class Lacrosse podcast. My name's Deemer Class, and I'm joined by my co-host Matt Dunn. We're joined by one of the true legends of our sport, Hall of Fame coach Cindy Timchal. Cindy is the all-time wins leader in Division I women's lacrosse with over 578 victories across 4 decades. This includes 8 national titles. She built Northwestern's program from scratch, led Maryland to an unprecedented 7 straight national championships, and for nearly 20 years has been at the helm of the United States Naval Academy, where she's turned the midshipmen into a perennial Patriot League power and even took them back to the Final Four in 2017. Beyond the numbers, her impact on the game runs deep. She's mentored many of today's top coaches, helped shape the modern era of women's lacrosse, and continues to inspire generations of players and leaders. We're excited to dive into her journey, her philosophy, and lessons she's learned along the way. Coach, again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Deemer. And thank you for the introduction. That's pretty special.
Coach, you're going to have to correct us if we get anything wrong, because I will say, of all the guests we've researched, the accolades of this one are impressive. So, we were joking earlier. I'm excited to have you on. It's great to meet you. Obviously, your reputation precedes yourself, and it's an honor to have you on today.
So, Coach, I think it would be awesome to just start out and talk about some of the early influences in your life. Like, I think if we were to look up, you talk to coaches, it's very well documented. The coaches that have come from your coaching tree. But take us back a little bit and talk about some of your early introductions to the game and who were those early influences for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprisingly, I grew up in a small town outside of Philadelphia called Havertown, Pennsylvania, and it was kind of like a little bit of a Stuckyville. Uh, it was an amazing, wonderful experience to be a real young, athlete, so young, and giving the kind of experiences that I had in Havertown, and then graduated from Haverford High. Surprisingly, I played sports like field hockey, basketball, and tennis at Haverford High, and then went to Westchester University, which is where I was introduced to lacrosse. And we did have lacrosse in at Haverford High, but I don't know. I don't know why I didn't pick it up earlier. And as you know, when you first start, and many of you can't even remember because you probably picked it up so young, particularly in Maryland, I ended up learning how to play from some of the best at Westchester University, and got coached by the best. That I feel very fortunate that I was introduced to that sport when I was a freshman in college, and I don't know. I think the one thing that I talk a lot even now about for my athletes, I could run, so I could run fast, and I just led with my speed and try to pick up the skills and catch up to the other exceptional players that were on the teams that I played on. And so, yeah, early on, I really feel it was my teammates at Westchester University and some of the best that competed for the U.S. team, whether it was Barb Rensemer, Janice Rensemer, Janie Diamond, these names, you could look up and see how they really excelled at the game at that period of time. And then with that, just having some really kind of cool coaches. I mean, they demanded a lot. You didn't say a whole lot to them. They didn't say a whole lot to you, but you just knew the way they looked at you on the field that you better just, get after it, so to speak. So I felt very fortunate to be in that kind of setting that really did lead the way for me to want to end up teaching, and then of course coaching in high school at Unionville High, and then ultimately I was fortunate enough to get right away into the college ranks, at a time when, it wasn't so big, there weren't that many programs. So that's kind of my little bit of a mini story early on in life.
Today, that would be so unique to learn how to play lacrosse your freshman year of college, and then to have the coaching career that you've had and the players you've coached that a lot of them would attribute, their success and a lot of the way you're doing now to you. I'm curious, was when you started playing lacrosse, uh, did you know you wanted to coach lacrosse shortly after? Or you just know you wanted to coach, or was there something about the game itself that drew you to it, or what by happen chance did you end up getting into lacrosse coaching rather than field hockey? I know you did coach field hockey, but
I
rather than
did.
take that
Yeah.
path forward.
Uh, I think it's just something that evolved. But again, I think this that exposure. We were very in a very unique school at Westchester University. I mean, if you look at the record books at the University of Maryland, we went down and beat them 17-3. I was on that team. So it's just so surreal that we were able to accomplish those kind of things at we were Division One. Now those Pennsylvania schools are Division Two. So that uniqueness and when you just hang around, Matt, you just start hanging around winners. You want to win, and when somebody runs by you, then it's kind of like that mini competition. So all that kind of led to the idea that just to be kind of cool, the experiences I had at Westchester to then you know at the end of the day, maybe I should have been a basketball coach. I was asked to be an assistant basketball coach at Westchester. However, I never regret the opportunities that I've been given um, right out of college. And ultimately, when you look at the schools that I was fortunate enough that they chose me to be a part of their program, whether it was at Penn, Northwestern, Maryland, and now here at the Naval Academy, they said yes to me, and I will be forever grateful. But those opportunities and what we were able to accomplish at those schools, I love the accolades. However, this is really all about athlete driven, believing in each other. And, I always smile when I think of knowing how they felt stepping on the field and coming away with a championship. And it's the memories that you'll never forget. And so I've been fortunate enough to be in those situations at the right time.
Yeah, there's so many, even from the last couple of things you've said. I feel like there's so many things I want to dive into, but I was catching up with Coach Kimmel before our podcast, who played for you in the early 90s. And when you were kind of talking about like those early coaches that demanded a lot of you, and you knew you were going to get after it. She kind of talked a lot about like ending practices with hard runs and conditioning, and you kind of said that as a player yourself, like using your speed and athleticism. Like, was that being in shape and the conditioning component, has that been something that's been core to your beliefs as a coach, of using that to build up your teams and programs?
Yeah. Westchester University, because it was heavy in health and physical education, and it was really originally like a teacher's college. So we were taught so many things. We learned how to do yoga back then and square dance, and we found the value of, human development and kinesiology, physiology. So I kind of always was drawn to the interests of that. But we also had a hill at Westchester that we ran up a lot. And, everybody's done the hill runs. And, it just kind of like, it's just a little gut check. It's an opportunity to see where you're at, see if you can grind something out. So that fitness piece and leading with speed, you have to decide as well, we can talk about a coach, but just as an athlete, whether you're, a young athlete with the youth programs going into high school, you got to, I've always felt about leading with your strength. Find those two or three things that you can absolutely do 100% of the time. And it could be diving for a loose ball. You can do that. Now, I'm not going to ask you to catch every ball. I'm not going to ask you to score on every shot. We're just asking you if you can do like three things: hustle back on defense if you turn the ball over, whatever that is. And I think that takes away a lot of stress of like, we're somewhat performance driven, but I think if you focus on those three little things that you can do, then those performances start to rise. And so, I guess I really thought about a lot of that through college. I do want to say that I was probably pretty tough on Kirsten. So, I think all of us as coaches were just a little bit tougher a little bit ago. And yeah, I mean, I hope that she doesn't.
Well, I'll
I
just chime in on that. Like she mentioned, and I'll just say, and I'm sure she's not the only one. She said that like one of the gifts of like your coaching was it kind of gifted this empowerment and belief that she could get through and do anything. And whether it's on the field, off the field. And Matt and I love learning about how coaches instill these things in players. And that empowerment is huge. And you're talking about a player led, athlete led mindset. So I think it's really cool to hear.
Yeah, and yeah, and thank you. I think it, for someone like Kirsten, and again, we always thought about the idea of what are they doing after they graduated, like 10 years, 20 years, and kind of just reflects that you did a pretty good job. But Kirsten was driven too. So don't get me wrong. We went to the same high school. Um, she was a very dedicated, tough athlete. And I think she took the demands of what we asked the team to do really to heart. And you know what it's like when you say, okay, you guys, we got to do a little bit more. And it's always the players that have done the most to come up to you. What more do you want me to do? And so, and the ones you want you to tell you what you want to do, whatever. But Kirsten was very special. She was a big part. In my second year, we got to the heartbreaking national championship final, lost with, Jenny Slinger on the field for UVA. And it was like, that stinks. And so we won it the next year with Kirsten on the field. So it was special.
Coach, I'm really interested in this, this word that's been brought up a few times, like demanding. And as a coach, I spoke to Coach Amplo a little bit because I got to play for him in the World Games, and he's a friend. And I just wanted to get his thoughts a bit. And one line he said is that his note is that she figures out a way to get the most out of her players. And I think as a coach, that's something we all want to figure out. There's different ways to do it. And I think as a younger coach myself, sometimes that intersection of you want to be demanding, but you also don't want to, lose the connection with the player. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on maybe what you've learned in finding that intersection to get the most out of your teams, get the most out of your players, in a way that allows the team to stay bought into to what you want them to do as a coach.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I I I truly believe that it sounds cliche-ish, but players don't always want to know what you know, but how much you kind of care. And that connection, and as a coach, saying relevant to kind of the environment they're in. Whether they were at, University of Maryland running from class, getting on their moped or whatever and coming to practice, or here at the Naval Academy where they've been immersed in their classes and the military aspect of the school. You just want to stay connected in that way and understand there's so much more than a lacrosse player that shows up in the afternoon to perform. But the intersection is, you want to get the most out of them, and I believe that they want that too. So you just try to push a little bit more and see how they feel about that. And I think that intersection is always a tough one for a lot of coaches, because you do want to be caring, compassionate. I know one time James Franklin talked about, it starts and ends with love. I also have just seen podcasts with, Tom Brady, saying, how tough it was for him. He wasn't that good. And people actually told him to his face he wasn't that good. So, I mean, that's not how you really generate and get the most out of a team. But beyond that is everyone matters. Every player on your team is relevant. And I think we're always trying to wage our worth on whether I start, whether I, come off the bench, whether I am just purely a practice player, a scout team player. And sometimes we put labels on players. I try to avoid that, but many of them embrace that role. Like, I'm going to go out and be, the best Chloe Humphreys I can be, that kind of mentality. And we love that, because role playing in any sport, and obviously in men's and women's lacrosse, is very empowering and impactful. If I could play like Michael Jordan, or if I can make that move, like on defense, like Matt Dunn, that type of thing. That role playing becomes a big part of how players actually learn, grow, and develop. But in the end, they're their own genuine self. And I think you need to value what they do bring to the team and find those things, find those nuggets that can, whether again, it's leading with speed, whether it is, their stick skills. I mean, everyone has something to contribute. And I think the other thing that I think is really important, and a lot of times I'll tell my coaches, when I say my coaches, like my Acacia, Walker Weinstein, coach it up. Players want to, they also want to be coached. They want to be coached, and they want to be coached up. So I feel like that's an important aspect for any coach. Is not only that idea of mentoring them, trying to get them to be the best version of themselves, and then bring that to the team, and then finally, to show them the skills and the videos and the mindset and everything that can put together. Because in the end, we're bringing those life skills. Whether it's the amazing coaches I coached at Maryland, players that now are coaches, or whether these amazing young women that compete for the Naval Academy that are, defending our country.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear. And I always think back to a quote from one of my mentors is like, great players want to be coached. They want to get that feedback. And I think what you're talking about too, of really getting to know the players, moving past, the labels, really showing that care for them, that allows you to give that extra push, because they know it's coming from that good place. And obviously it's what everyone talks about, but you have to live it, and you've been living it at the highest level for the longest time.
Thanks.
I do want to just transition a little bit here, and it started to come up, in terms of, some of the coaches that, and we'll definitely, touch on more on some of those coaches that you've coached over the years. But as we kind of move to thinking about, you got right into coaching, and now your legacy of building multiple programs, Northwestern, Maryland, Navy. Maybe you could just touch a little bit on, what's been a common thread in those scenarios, and what has that process been like for you doing that now, not just once, but multiple times, and especially as the women's game has grown so much over the years.
you know, a Yeah, it's interesting. One of my first thoughts that comes to mind right out of right out of college, I coached at Unionville High School, and then I was assistant field hockey coach and lacrosse coach. The head field hockey coach was the home ec teacher. I don't know if you know what that is. You learned how to cook. You learned how to do housework. It was kind of cool. They probably don't have it in high school anymore. And I kept thinking in my mind that I know a whole lot more than she does about field hockey. However, every Friday she baked brownies, and we baked our way to the state finals. Even though I felt like she didn't know a lot about field hockey, I just think there's just so many cool things that you could do for a team that can bring them together. And that just reminded me of, if you do a couple little things, that kind of are special. If we're going to be doing a Travis Manion run next week, and little things that kind of bring it together. But I just found that interesting, that in the end, I just kind of sat back and observed. And I was like, I'm just going to do what I can contribute, let her lead the team. And I literally keep talking about the idea that we baked our way to a title, not a title championship, but to the title championship game. Um, I was at UPenn. We had an amazing culture early on, and I worked under legendary Ann Sage. We were good at lacrosse, so good. And we got to not the ends we had then the AIAW, we got to third in the country and lost to Maryland. I know this is back in the day when there were no restraining lines. Like we lost like 3-1 or something, a ridiculously low score, like a field hockey score. But I learned a lot about, again, that toughness of being at a high academic school, showing up at Franklin Field every day to practice, and then, playing an amazing schedule locally, Maryland, Towson, Penn State. So that kind of led the way. So when I went to Northwestern, I was hired as an assistant field hockey and had lacrosse, and we never had lacrosse. I just said, we're going to take all these field hockey players, because I was able to do it at Westchester. And they had the right mindset, the competitive edge, the willingness to want to win. And we can talk about that in another segment, because sometimes that causes stress, like we got to win, but it's like a winning mentality. And we were able to put together. Back in the day, there were dual athletes, so that made it easier that we would recruit, the best field hockey player, and she just happened to play lacrosse. And so that helped a lot. But again, it was totally a leap of faith for those young athletes to make a decision, to go out to Northwestern University, because it was just unheard of. And now we witness it so many years later with Kelly Amante Hillard doing unreal things at Northwestern that you would never dream that could happen, anywhere west of the Mississippi, with no men's lacrosse, a singular women's sport. It's just unprecedented. So, and then, yeah. So I just thought if we could carve out a couple big wins at Northwestern, if I was given a chance, I wasn't ever looking to leave Northwestern. It was kind of unexpected that Maryland came knocking at the door. It was very difficult in the Midwest, in Chicago, because there weren't a lot of Division I programs. Now there's at least a Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Marquette, et cetera. So yeah, I thought, given the chance when I did at Maryland, that they already had won national titles, and I just didn't want to. I guess in the end of the day, because I was following a legendary coach of Sue Tyler. At the end of the day, I'm not going to say it online because I can't. I just didn't want to mess it up. And so I did everything I could to be a little bit tougher and a little more demanding, because I think, they were a little bit, and Kirsten probably told you, a little bit wild. Just tried to reel it in so we can win a couple more games and beat Penn State and have the signature win. So we got to the national championship final.
Coach, you get to I just want to kind of reverse a little bit because, talking about the experience of baking your way to the state finals for a high school
Awesome
field hockey
story.
team. How does that and you're being a bit facetious, but I think, there's a lot of truth to it. How does that analogy, you get to Northwestern, what we're starting a program, it's hard to get probably hard to get the players to believe that you can be competitive at first. What's the mindset, or was there an example of you were doing to bake your way to be successful there? Were there other things that you kind of we got to lean into this or find a way to get these players to believe and buy into what we're doing?
Well, and again, I think it leans back into the idea of we were going to be super fit. I there is there's so much to be said, and I really do not like this phrase, is being the underdog. And that to me has so many implications. I just felt that we were going to sneak away a couple wins at Maryland, at Penn State, because they just overlooked us. And so, I have never been in a mindset, because it makes then overall you feel like I'm inferior. Like, well, they really aren't going to respect us because they don't think we're good. So now we're going to go out and really show that we're good. So that's something. I mean, again, we can talk about that later. But I do believe many of the teams, I think ultimately when you carve out those wins, then they take you much more seriously. But I always believe in two teams stepping on the field. When the whistle blows, it's only the team that shows up for 60 minutes or more, if overtime, they show up. And of course, that's defined by so many ways. But when they show up to compete like crazy, then you look at the scoreboard. And if you win, it's great. And if you don't win, well, maybe you really weren't that good enough that day. So I think that's how we were able to kind of incentivize the idea that, we're Northwestern out here and that's why I always think that we always want to step on the field with the great teams, because you really want to, I don't want to say that in some ways you're measuring yourselves, but in other ways it's just like a sparring partner. Maybe they're going to teach us a lesson on things that we have to go back and start practicing and decide what we have to start doing and what we have to stop doing. If we want to take this, journey, of excellence on the field, representing, the Naval Academy, putting away your, jersey at the end of the game in a better place. Let's put it on and play. And then when we're done, let's fold it up and put it in a better place. And I think, you just kind of get those kind of mindsets going, and then they run a little bit harder in practice and really rise up to the occasion when needed, when the moment is there. So I find that to be effective and helpful in those kind of situations of growing a mindset of competing tough, for each other, obviously. And maybe perhaps, and I know we overuse this term, something greater than ourselves, so that, kind of have to check your maybe a little bit of ego at the door so that, we're doing it for each other.
And coach, you're touching on some terms and phrases that I think in 2025, people could be thinking like, yeah, like I've heard that, but like when you're talking about like the times that you were at Northwestern and Westchester and like these experiences in Penn that have built your 40 plus years coaching college, like you've really been doing this for, an amount of time where you've been living and learning these things that now people talk about. People talk about them as like how you mentally approach things, but I think you've had, and then you were even talking about visualization, right? And imagining these things. So like you've been impressing upon these different lessons that nowadays like people are talking about more, but you've clearly been forward thinking and using these with your teams. Like, has the mindset and mentality piece, has it been something that's been consistent for you? Have you found, I mean, obviously you've grown across these years, but like, how have you seen that evolve in your coaching when you're talking about mindset and in these concepts?
Yeah, the mindset piece is critically important, and I think the consistency. I I feel we could do more, and that is something when you decide we do maybe 13, 20 segments in a practice plan. There better be something about connection, mindset, gratitude, stepping out together, put, arm in arm, just say something, that maybe, turn to the left and tell one of your teammates something that they might not know about you. But whether it's a true meditation, or, we've started talking recently, we always talk about visualizing, meditating, clearing your mind. There's always a merit, you get your good old 3x5 card and do some affirmations. I'm a strong, vibrant athlete. I step out on the field believing in myself. I go against the tough players because I'm tough. Any kind of thing that you can just affirm that who you are, and that's critically important. We've been recently talking about kind of a feel a vision, which is really feeling all those things. And yeah, I know there's a lot of science behind a lot of the things I've just said, but there's also a lot of just emotionality of just quieting the mind. And, again, I keep going back to that believing in yourself, and belief still comes back to, I could say, Matt, your defensive footwork is amazing. And Deemer, the way you can, come around the crease and score or find, your lax IQ finding, but that came from a lot of reps. And so when you step out on the field, you felt confident because you put that time in, and there's no replacement of the mindset and the connection and the believing without that behind it, is critically important.
How have you stayed up on this? Are you a big reader? Like, how did you meet the right people? Did you have the right mentors? Like, 'cause some of that stuff, there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of techniques, the visualization, the affirmations, and even still, like, how have you developed as a coach with all of these things?
Well, history wise, when I was at the University of Maryland, I got connected with Jerry Lynch. He is really kind of like a spiritual advisor rather than saying a sports psychologist. A lot of coaches back, when I was coaching, Jen Adams and Kathy Nelson Reese would kind of run away from a sports psychologist, might think you're weak or you don't know how to coach. But we embraced Jerry Lynch, and one of his books, my favorite book, is Thinking Body, Dancing Mind. He's written, like, I don't know, 20 some more since then, but he was really impactful um, for winning, the stream of national championships that we won. I mean, we're never going to discount my all-time greatest, and I have many great assistant coaches in Gary Gate. This was between, I was fortunate enough to think about putting together the pieces. What do we have to do to win a championship? Find an international player like Sarah Forbes, Jen Adams, get Kirsten to run faster and be tougher, even though she was tough. Gary Gate came in, and, he was a real cool cat. He helped us a lot, and just, and we could talk a little bit more about Gary and the subtleties of his coaching with me during that period of time was amazing. So I guess, but once we got Jerry Lynch involved, we just had that spirituality, a spiritual connection that allowed us to kind of displace any, everybody was going to talk about, you just beat Virginia. How are you going to beat them again? And we're like, kind of the mentality was, you beat them once, you beat them twice, you beat them 3 times if you have to. But we get in our heads about keeping score, what happened before. So yeah, the spirituality started a lot during that time. I think I had a little bit going from Northwestern too, not in the same way. But I'm so happy that those kind of connections and the mindset people that have come out and talked about, what it is meant to work with someone. And we witnessed it more recently, with some of these marquee tennis players. They have a team of not only physiotherapists, and coaches, but they also have mindset coaches and things like that. So I'm thrilled because another tool like that and the power of the mind is so amazing in our world of lacrosse.
We had last year on our first season of our podcast, we had Gary and Acacia, and Acacia talked a lot about Jerry's influence on her as well, and some of like her beliefs that have, I think were really built during her time at Maryland. And Gary also talked a lot about the visualization, so it's really cool to hear you kind of connect all the dots too, because you guys were all part of such a, special run during that time. And, I it did make me think of, you were mentioning Gary, Kirsten was talking about, hey, Cindy's always thinking outside the box. You're orchestrating, like you said, trying to put all the pieces together. But also came at a time too where, like, the rules, I'm sure as they are today, continuing to evolve. And last year, Gary would talk about, just trying to find little advantages, little things that, so maybe like as a staff, like for what the rules were back then, like what are some stories around some of those interesting nuances that you guys were, in the coach's office trying to think how you could create an advantage for Maryland?
Yeah, I was probably more like, what are we going to do when this team does this to us? Like what if they sit back in a zone and, or what if they come out and do high pressure and they're all over us defensively? And Gary go, well, if they come out, if they come after us, we'll just run by and score, you know. I mean, if you really do have the way he could express it back then, you really do go out and play with a lot of confidence. If you just say, this is what you're going to do when they do this, and I feel like that's really important. And, I go, like getting back, if they're in the zone, a lot of teams that pack it in, you've got to find creative ways of, I know a couple years ago, Denver had this amazing zone, had a big upset against Carolina at Carolina. And it was like, then when they ended up playing Northwestern in the Final Four, they had Northwestern's like, if we don't amp this pressure up and play like kind of a full 12 woman ride, they were like trading goals. And I think whether it was Scotty or Kelly just said, like, we've got to amp up the ride so that we can sneak away some goals and create our offense off of early offense, off of a caused turnover, an interception, put the pressure back on them. So those are the kind of things that we'll discuss a lot, whether it was Gary at Maryland or whether it was here. Even more so now, our coaching staff at Navy, we'll sit down and talk for hours about every scenario, whether it's the draw stick, the wing players on the draw, the goalie clear, what are we going to do? I mean, and we try to map out almost every scenario. Yeah. So I think that piece is that kind of coaching it up piece, because when you step out on the field, if you're playing a Carolina or a BC or a Northwestern, you've got to be prepared. You have to be prepared. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? What are you doing at practice to do that? Well, that, sit down and talk about those things that are imperative, if it's Army week or if it's, this is for football, opening week of football, like every aspect of the game. And you're always going to ask the question, are we ready? Yeah, maybe. But the more that you can take away maybe as many questions and what we can control, what we can do, how we can rep it out, how we can be that freshest team stepping out on the field and go the distance. Those are things that there's science behind it, but there's also, the coaches have to make a decision on, the substitute, midfield lines. I mean, Notre Dame men's lacrosse with 3 midfield lines, crazy, right? That's how you win a national title, with 3 midfield, the first, right? Or the second, 3 midfield lines.
Yeah,
Crazy.
I think the first, and it's also one of those things where, and we've just ourselves been coaching the last 6 or 7 years, but you see the game probably just move in cycles, right? Like every 5 years, 10 years, like so, like the three, for the men's side, like 3 lines of middies has, always been like the dream, and I remember like our rec teams in middle school, like we had 3 lines, and then now, like when we were in college, it was 2 lines, but very specialized, like women's, it seemed to evolve to now like, hey, two midi lines is pretty common, right? But people are still going a lot of 2 ways, right?
Right.
With maybe a flyer or two, so
Right.
it's but then if you buck the trend when everyone starts going one way, maybe that is that outside the box to then give you the advantage.
I know. We come up with a narrative. We said if we do these three things, we're going to be really, really successful. And then you find that that isn't even true. Like you just made it up. So I do believe um, three midfield lines, like I said in the very beginning, is insane. And I, the middies, this is tough, as you know. It's the you know what's it? Thankless middies. Nobody appreciates what a true two-way midfielder can do. Maybe it's a thought, well, they just are kind of good at a little bit of this, and maybe they're good on D. But if I get that midi back on D, I'm going to attack that midi because they haven't gotten the reps that those, long poles and defenders have gotten. It's crazy. I believe that right now, watching, what did we witness of, from Taylor Cummings to Marie McCool, to, Bella Smith was big part of being that two-way midi for BC 2 years ago when they won the national title. And like, who would have thought an Osborne, is that her name? Freshman out of Colorado for UNC. It's crazy. They were all game changers. I mean, Osborne was a game changer last year. I mean, I know there was signature Chloe Humphreys. Don't get me wrong. I get all that, Ashley, et cetera. But that the two-way midfielder, and we're all now really trying to, get them
Find
locked
it.
in.
It's like
Yeah, find it
it's
and
the
keep it.
unicorn almost.
Yeah, well, we want to keep it because you talked about it. Oh, we'll go with two lines, and then when it gets tight in the fourth quarter, I'm going to go more on that first line, and then I think a key is developing the full two-way middies. I know people are going to say you're crazy, but and it's something we don't even a lot of it we don't see in the club level because they're going to their strength. They're using this great attack, midi attack, coming onto the field, making a difference on offense, and then they're taking them off and putting a better defender midi. And I get that, but when you find a true two-way midi, we've been looking for them hard in our recruiting class coming up, and it's something I think a lot of coaches should really consider now. And it's not easy, as you know, because we're so specialized now, but the two-way midi, I think, is the way to go.
Coach, I want to just before we move too far off of this, we touched on it a little bit, but it's worth highlighting is that you did win 7 championships in a row at Maryland, and you spoke about earlier about the mental piece of even being a team 2 times in a year, right? Like, because that is a mental battle, and I think anybody that's had some success in sports understands one of the hardest things is when you have some success, continuing to have that success, because that, if you will, that underdog mentality can be powerful. But then when you start winning, complacency typically follows. Now, people say winning back to back is hard and three-peats are incredibly hard. What challenges did you find that you dealt with as you were navigating through the success you had for 7 straight years at Maryland, and not allowing that complacency or constantly combating that possibility of complacency creeping in?
Yeah, I could say one thing, whether it's relevant or not. I really truly believed, and kind of like when I talked about being hired at Maryland to be the head coach of lacrosse and not wanting to mess it up. I feel like every class was just their mantra, and their conviction was, don't sell us, let's say Jen Adams, graduated, don't sell us short. We're going to go out and we're going to, win too. We're going to work as hard. We're going, yeah, you just have to keep those challenges going. There's a lot of ways you can do that in practice. The challenge, kind of a little, a lot of comps. We do a lot of comps in practice, to keep, kind of keep the score going and keep, the competition going in practices. But I really do believe that at Maryland, it seems so shallow, but they just didn't want to mess it up the next year. They wanted to do exactly what the team did the year before. They wanted to do it again.
Because my next thought is like, does that put a lot of pressure on the players? Then the flip side of that, of like complacency, is almost feeling this overwhelming pressure to not mess it up.
Yeah, I agree. I thought this is, we were losing to James Madison. I thought, okay, our streak is over, and I have to accept that right now. And all of a sudden, we stole the ball, ran down, and tied it. And within another minute, we went down and we won the game. With good, I like to take credit, but I had Jen Adams on the field, and she did a lot to help that happen. And I, I did, and those players that you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. The clock is running. We don't have the ball. This is not going to end well. And all of a sudden they come up, and that's not always to be the superstar, but somebody makes a big play and you do that. So I never quite, we internalized the pressure. I never felt that pressure though. We're like, okay, we won once, twice, three times. I mean, how many times do you want us to win? But I always wanted to do it for the team that hadn't done it. So I think that was the thing, because you never wanted to leave without feeling that the way it feels to win it all. And yeah, I think that helped. I remember 2 years ago, I was talking to Acacia, and I think they were a little nervous because they were playing Syracuse in the Final Four. And, I think it was mentally tough, because now you're in the ACC where you play a team in the regular season. And if you're, the top 2 teams, 3 teams, you're going to end up playing them again in the ACC championship, at one point, whether you win or lose. And of course, then you're going to play them again if they advance. And it was, and I'm very good friends with Kayla Trainer. So I just, I just said to Acacia, kind of like, it's kind of like the thing, you knew this is how it was going to come down. The team that you really don't want to play, whether it's in the first round, the second round for the championship. Oh, you wish they were losing. Wish they got upset. In the end, you knew you were going to have to play them. And I kind of displaced a little bit of, you almost want to be blessed of the opportunity. We got back to the Final Four. We have this chance. You don't know whether you're going to win or lose, but it was a good game. And Syracuse played really well, and BC pulled it out. So I just felt like those are the things when you said like a pressure, especially when you're playing that team that you beat, and the revenge factor. It's very powerful, and it was always powerful in the men's side. I think it's even more powerful on the women's side, where a team that may have beat someone earlier in the season, playing in a conference championship or something, they end up losing. So, which I think is healthy. Very healthy, to experience the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, and you just hope it's not your last game. You hope it's an opportunity to learn and grow as a team, to discover maybe ultimately how good you can be before the end of the season. So,
and just getting, 30 players, 35 players on the same page to have the same mindset, to be able, because you're going to have some players probably feeling great. Yeah, we've already beat this team twice. We're going to do it a third time, and then some thoughts might creep in. Well, yeah, it's really hard to beat a team 3 times, So now you're thinking, well, they're going to be ready. They're going to try to get revenge for the third time. But then it's truly is just the one game in front of you that you have to play and be ready for, So and then with all this, you're talking about college kids, you're not talking about professionals, right? Like you got some freshmen, sophomore, senior, everyone's kind of working through this.
oh yeah, I mean, and probably maybe a quote from whether it's me or Jerry Lynch. What you just said is kind of stinking thinking. Like, I would call Jerry and go, oh my gosh, we're playing Duke and they have this player and this player. And he goes, what are you doing? Like, you basically, what we do, as whether it's a coach or a team, is we create a story. And this story literally you just made up. Because like you said, at the end of the day, you need to go win prepared. You coach up your team, prepare them as well as possible, and then see how the game unfolds. It is a little bit like a microcosm of life. Gosh, that's why people, are breaking records all over the country, whether it's men's lacrosse, women's lacrosse, European women's soccer. I mean, you go to witness the highs and the lows and the coming from behind and the penalty kicks or whatever it is. Or that last, you keep repeating, Dylan Amonte's shot that Shea Dolce made. Yeah, I mean, we just can't get enough of that. We really can't. And so that's why sport is so crazy good. It really is.
So, Coach, the last couple of years, I think one of the first times you might have reached out to me. Funny enough, you mentioned like Denver defense. I remember putting together a quick Denver defensive video, and you started pinging me about it. And kind of since then, it's been really fun talking lacrosse with you. And I think you're, again, always trying to find different things, for development and technique and scheme. And I'd love to hear some of your perspective on player development, and how you're thinking about that in today's game. How you're maybe building some of that time into your weeks and your practices, and what does that look like for you in this modern version of lacrosse?
Uh, I do know we love to kind of steal drills from everybody. If we see something we like, and that we have when we're doing a lot of showcases, we're teaming up with another coach. I have this great drill. I'm like to my coaching staff, let's bring back the great drills that we're doing, that other teams are doing that really work, that are exciting. It might be the same drill we've been doing, but they added an extra element. I've been leaning towards what's called a little bit of like transformational lacrosse. Let's say there's a guy, and his name escapes me right now, but he does transformational basketball, and he's really all about, again, how you become a better player by not doing lacrosse shuttles. Okay, line drills. Okay, we're all going to do jump shots or layups without any kind of constraints. So I think drill building is all about constraints. So you need to put something to get that athlete to kind of improve their lax IQ and understand what is actually happening. They're never going to understand that by doing shuttles. So I think shuttles are a waste of time. We do them sometime, so don't.
Yeah, it's a good warm up. It's a good warm up.
I know. Time is really valuable, but we do a lot of, and Kelly Amante Hiller does a lot. I know Acacia, just a lot of, again, everybody, basketball is classic for the 3v2 transitional game. We do a lot of 3v2s from the side and threes on each side, kind of, going back to the Jamie Monroe, JM3 nations looks. So I really think you have to put more constraints, have someone chasing you. We all do this in drills, but I think we need to do more of them, and do them consistently, to have a better drill set. Now, as you know, one of the biggest things, like, we just had a beep test, and some players want to come back and go, I know I can do better. And, I think in the beep test, the question is that going to make us win more games? Well, maybe, but, they get better at the test. And just like in drills, Matt, you got better at that drill. You were doing an unsettled Greyhound drill. We have so many drills. We call so many different names. We do a Philly Philly drill, a Scotty drill named after Scotty Hiller, all unsettled, all making decisions when I go, when I stay, who's talking to me, who's behind me, whatever it is. But it's, at times you want that drill to translate into the game. So that's always a hard part because players get better at the drills. They get better. And you have to say that, right, Matt?
Yeah, well, it's I love talking about this, and I every chance I get to, I dig into this with coaches, and we know the book you're talking about, Alex Sarama, I think's the guy's name. We've dove into that constraints-led approach, and I was a high school basketball player and all of that, so I love trying to learn from other sports for lacrosse. And a question that always kind of pops up is it feels like there's this like spectrum of teaching something that goes from like, to your point, super isolated, like, hey, stand here, hold the stick like this, to then just like free play, you're in the game. And then there's this whole spectrum in between that you're kind of tapping into with these like constraint drills that allow you to be in certain environments that will hopefully create these skill solutions that will happen in the game. Question for you is like as you're implementing those drills and you're doing the 3v2 with the constraints that you like because you and the coaching staff say this will help us. Now there's an element where maybe a girl has poor shooting technique. And so is there a side of you also that's going to grab that girl or do some work on the actual like that more like stabilized teaching of like shooting technique that's a little more isolated that by itself is not going to translate to a game, but there's some big like piece missing in these drills that they're not quite getting, if you follow that at all. I'm curious like how much of that isolated minute detailed technique do you find yourself and staff leaning into versus just trying to curate these constrained environments for them to play?
Yeah. Oh, Matt. Yeah, I do. I 100% believe in shooting development. I follow Jules online. I watch Ali Mastriani. I had Ali Messenger when she won a national title and was my assistant for a couple of years. Just work on shooting and technique and technique. Yeah, so there is value. But once you do that little corrective thing, I think that you have to put those constraints back on. And that's always hard. You can use your coach or a manager or, I don't know, a player to help do that. But then you don't want your defense to be soft to allow for your attack to excel. Yeah, those are great questions. Um, you know, I think the game of lacrosse was always based on fun, freedom, fast. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to take any of that away because that keeps them excited about going out and playing. And, when we're scrapping for a ball on a scrap drill and everybody's cheering each other on, or even if you just do a brave heart, that excitement. And a lot of times there's a lot of bad technique that we witness in practices. We film every practice, so we go back and look, and we go, yeah, that was great energy. And at the end of the day, some of the worst shots, or the worst passes down the field in football, ended in championship season. So, yet, to be a kind of performer, like a Chloe Humphreys, and I only bring her up because I know how much she worked extra in the backyard. I know how hard Charlotte North worked after practices in her high school in Texas. That I guess I think coaches can take the players, so far with the individuals. I think that is critically important. That's the time to really hone in on technique and style and, staying low. I just watched Petramala, stay low, approach low, be low. Yet I do believe that, there's a lot of, I just think there's a lot of work that the elite athletes have put behind them that we have no idea how much time they have put in to be those generational players like Chloe Humphreys and Charlotte North and Izzy Skane. I mean, it's just incredible to think about it. It really is like, you want to cry because of the level of talent on the women's side and what they have meant for this game. Crazy. The craziness of how they have been able to perform under pressure is really, truly what they did. And they kind of figured it out. You know what I mean? We might dive deeper into Charlotte or Chloe in her backyard with two other sisters, maybe checking, the little baby checking all over her. But those are the times that you can really do those skill developments. But Matt, I really do believe in what you said is, you want to witness all this going on and the constraints and how they do this, and then try to go back and make some corrective. Some coaches don't believe that you say anything. Some go, hey, the next time, make sure you get a hands-free, step off so you can get that shot off. Whatever it is, I think those little tips, I think constant coaching to an extent of encouragement. That was a great ground ball. Go all the way through. Whatever it is, I think will pay a lot of dividends for that particular individual and for that team. I really do.
Where would you also say, because this comes to mind for me, I think you can get to a point where you can give all the feedback in the world, but then it still falls on the player to actually implement it. So, as a coach, like, where do you draw the line between giving more feedback and then trying to use a method like playing time to, actually get them to learn it? Like, you have to hold them accountable. Like, what are your opinions on, how you view that process?
Yeah.
Like, how do you want to give a leash, right, as a coach, but
yeah.
when they're not taking the right shots, it's like, you gotta rein them in a little bit. It's not an easy thing.
No, it isn't. I do believe that lacrosse is a team player driven sport. I know there was a sports psychologist I just saw that talked about I think it was at Alabama football, and he goes, you have great coaches here and great all that. He goes, you're not going to, you're only go as far as the leaders on the team, and I do believe that, and I do believe in making really bad mistakes. I kind of do. I don't believe in it, but you know what I'm saying? I really feel like players you just have to give them, I think practice needs to be a safe environment where players can go out and, kind of Ted Lasso, be curious about perhaps how good they can be or what they need to do, and kind of, if they can kind of self-assess that, I think that's the best way. I really do. And I do believe that as coaches, we, including myself, try to control too much. In fact, when we understand that we have literally no control over anything, the officials, the outcome, the player that might get hurt, whatever it is, then we'll win more games. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I think there has to be a higher, and again, there has to be, depending on your style, there has to be a higher tolerance of mistakes in this game. It's hard. It's a hard game, and it's exhausting. Our players like Michaela Meeks, Michaela Williams, we call her Meeks. She probably runs like 7 miles in a game. I mean, it's hard. So, yeah, I like players to feel free to make mistakes. And then you have to at some point, but
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
I'll say to my coaches and just kind of find, like, when we're doing something, I'm like, oh, that offense, I didn't get a shot off and it wasn't hands, and I'm like, it's almost like we use this kind of quote, like, no boring offense. Like, I want it to be exciting. I want them to like do something. And again, that goes back to doing something different. Let's figure out how good we can work together on offense to create something, get something, like maybe a second shot, maybe a rebound off the goalie, maybe an 8-meter, kind of just think in those terms, because the mistakes are going to be a lot. Turnover rates can be really high. And I know it's a real big thing with announcers and stuff, but yeah. I mean, I kind of witnessed that. I think I was watching was it Sixes in England was playing, I forget what team in England, already like in the first 10 minutes had like 10 turnovers. And that's a problem. That means they were tight, tense, tentative, didn't believe in themselves, and probably didn't show up that day.
I have a question on that. I was just thinking because like that point, you know, allowing mistakes, I think is really important because I'm in a unique position where in the summertime I'm a player and I get coached, and in the spring I'm a coach and I coach high school players, and then the rest of the year Deemer and I are always working with players, and so I kind of have to put on different hats, and it allows me to catch myself the things I ask my athletes when I coach. And then the summer when I'm getting coached, I'm like, this is a lot harder to do it than it is to ask somebody to do it. And the game happens fast, and you think you're making the right decision, and so mistakes happen. But then there's like this line of maybe these standards are non-negotiables where like this is what we do, and I will hold you accountable to this. These aren't like, walking when you should be running is not the mistake I'm talking about, but the mistake is you made that look, it's a risky pass. I don't know about that, but I get you tried it. We can work through that. Do you have like a list of standards or clear things that the players understand? Like these are the non-negotiables. Like you will be held accountable if you do or don't do this. But outside of that, we trust you to make plays, and we'll work through the decisions and some of the skill work.
Uh-huh. My style of coaching is to I never really talk about non-negotiables as much as let's run this, let's run it through, make sure you're holding space here. Let's attack more of that east-west rather than north-south or whatever, coming around the crease. But again, we're talking about, you are coaching high school, whatever age that is, 15 through 17 or whatever. And college is 18 through 22-ish. I don't know. I just found out you could like be a cheerleader, a guy cheerleader. It's like 26 years old. But I do believe it's crazy. I'll send that to you, Deemer. Anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, a fully developed mind is like after 22. I just think it's hard. I get the non-negotiables. I just think when it's all about trust, and you go over certain things, and a lot of times players will be like, yeah, we definitely did that. And they turn the ball, like you call a timeout and you're running something and they just turn it over. It happens. I honestly think we just have to laugh more. I know there's a lot at stake. Don't get me wrong. I know that athletes take things seriously, just from the very beginning. They want to have the right mindset. They want to be coached up. They want to do the skill set that gets them to where they can perform. I think it is fun based. I think you just pat someone on the back. I remember it was Georgetown. The guy missed the shot. It was not a good look in basketball. And but I just think that, you got to keep believing in what you're doing. And sometimes they're just not ready for that, whatever you were trying to hold them accountable for. I think gentle reminders. I just think we tend to be, as coaches, rigid, real rigid, sometimes a little judgy. And I just think we have to look outside of that as an opportunity to approach them in a way, because athletes lose confidence. They already don't have confidence. The best athletes don't have confidence. So we just have to do, I know I'm not talking about being a cheerleader. I'm talking about just finding ways to reach them in a way that ultimately those, what we might call non-negotiables. And I get that. I totally get that. We probably said that a couple of times, like, turning the ball over in the midfield is tough. I mean, you can find ways to take care of the ball, but you have to make sure under pressure that you rep those reps, because that's what happens. I mean, that's what a Carolina is going to do to you. as soon as you have the ball, they're going to put so much pressure that your you're kind of like paralyzed. And then you have to make decisions. And sometimes you're not great decisions and you throw the ball away, let's say. Um, and they've been on the flip side of that 2 years ago. I mean, if you want to talk about, the magical coaching woman in Jenny, what they did 2 years ago gave them no data to show or prove that they could do what they did this year. So I'm going to have to give her a call and ask her, what was it that they just honestly just made a decision. You make a decision that this is who we are. This is what we're going to be. How are we going to, again, we're human beings. So it's not like we're not human doers. So if you want to do certain things on the field, then be that athlete. Be the athlete that steps out confident. Be the athlete that put the reps behind. Be that athlete that has, feels at this point, this is where I'm at. And I can live with that now and go after it, and then figure out what do you have to do to be that athlete, and then keep working on that.
Coach, we had a couple more things we wanted to touch on before we wound down here. And I want to take that last question and kind of parlay it right into Navy, and I'd love to hear about, what's it like coaching at Navy? What's it like, leading these women who are going to go on to serve our country and do amazing things. And you want to make this experience fun for them, playing lacrosse, like, what is it like? And, how has that experience been over the last, 20 years or so?
Yeah. I mean, it's truly amazing and a blessing to be the head coach of the Naval Academy. These young women are extraordinary. They do lead by example. You come to one of the top leadership schools in the country, so you learn how to lead. And that doesn't come not necessarily that naturally sometimes with all people, including women. But, the academies are unique and kind of a better experience of discipline, of, again, doing it for something more than yourself, and it kind of, we've always had this motto about expecting to win, and again, prophetically is, we got to win this game. It's like winning the moment, winning the little battles that, end up in winning the victory. Kind of like we just want to just keep, for our players, I just want to, no matter what it is on the scoreboard, like just keep, kind of just keep going. Those mantras, we go, keep going, you are strong, keep going, you are strong. Playing Virginia, I thought there were just little windows of opportunity that if we could win that next draw, if we can get through that hard ride in the midfield and then, kind of take off on an angle, that we had better opportunities to score. And we took advantage of that. So, yeah, but, to have this, the women are amazing. I feel like a lot of my players are truly, in many ways, generational players. For those to make that leap of faith, 80% have never had any kind of like military affiliation. And I think you said early on, I've had a Top Gun and Mary Rudham. We were featured in Inside or Lacrosse magazine with Jenna and Julia Collins, the twins that came through and got us to the Final Four in 2017. Kelly Larkin was just incredible lefty attacker who, probably would have two years. Well, she has at least 1 year of eligibility left if she's interested. Because we never were able to get those seniors back for that final, with the shutdown. So but yeah, I think being here in Annapolis and being in the top leadership school in the country and the top public education in the country and Eastern seaport of Annapolis, it's just truly, truly amazing. We have an amazing administration, an amazing new athletic director in Michael Kelly. We have visions of a new lacrosse facility that will break ground in this spring. And we met with that's why I had to reschedule. Joe Amplo and I met with contractors a couple days ago. And so, yeah, it's exciting, really exciting to be a part of something that, that these young women, and they continue to coach too. They'll go to Pensacola, they're coaching clubs. They're at Jacksonville coaching clubs. So they're never going to give away or give up that experience of being a part of an amazing lacrosse program, but they're also going to serve their country in many different ways, and they're doing it now.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's I mean, truly the sacrifice and choosing a different path. It's so commendable, and it's really cool to see. And for them to have the experience they're having and will get to have, but then also to see everything you've done with building the program is really exciting. And coach, I think one of the last things that we'd love to hear your perspective on. We talked a little bit about it before in terms of like your coaching tree and people that you've inspired that continue to coach in this game. But what advice would you give for young head coaches, young coaches, that they can take with them if they're listening to this podcast and try to implement into their coaching careers?
Yeah, I think it's kind of cool. There are a lot of young coaches that have taken over programs, and also love the idea of experienced coaches that to continue to coach and inspire. I mean, Jenny Levy is an example of, a product of Baltimore going down to UVA and having a whole full career at UNC, and it still comes back to the sport that you love. So these young coaches that come in, many of them are, the first thing I said to Maryland, because I think they were afraid. They were just afraid when I showed up, like a new coach. And I just tried to say, well, I'm kind of afraid too. I'm scared. The word was scared. And I think it's a little scary to be, many head coaches have been assistants and now they become a head coach. You might call them a younger coach, but I think the coaching career is exciting. I think we have a good mentorship in IWLCA to help those coaches. I stay connected with a lot of coaches on a daily, weekly basis, whether we talked about this, Deemer, whether it's Jen Kent for guidance, myself, or whether it is, Jenna Drummond at UMass or Kelly Monte Hiller. I feel that those players or those coaches who were players at one point, they were very young coaches. And so I think for those, I think they need, the young coach needs, they already have data that shows young coaches can thrive, excel, coach it up. And if they feel insecurities, they just have to go back to those mantras that we talked about, but also call those coaches and stay connected. Whether we have the coaches clinics and really witnessing a lot online that just kind of say, yeah, I really, I love what they're saying. I feel that. And I feel like I'm going to insert that into my coaching style. So I think it's exciting. I think there's going to be more programs that are going to start up. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity that if you can like kind of fulfill your dream, as we all have, that lacrosse, when you first started playing, has meant so much in your life that you continue to give back with these kind of programs and with coaching. I mean, Matt, what you're doing, and also Deemer, the whole idea of you playing and then connecting with a high school. I mean, that's just totally giving back to a sport that we all love. So I'm excited for those young coaches that are taking over, whether it's a new program or existing program, and hopefully in the ACC, like an SMU will start up, maybe in the AAC, the University of Central Florida, whatever it is. I think the growth of women's lacrosse is going to continue, and the opportunities to grow this game that we all love, not only into the nation's top program collegiately, but also worldwide.
That's awesome, coach. And it's been cool, like having you on, hearing the impact you've had as you look around the women's game, like all the coaches. I think impact's a word that Deemer and I talk about a lot. And one of the reasons we've been gravitated into coaching is that we were coached by such great coaches that we it's had such an immense influence on us that to get the chance to do that is just such a meaningful thing. And so I think a lot of coaches will, listen to this podcast to hear you talk and steal a bunch from, somebody like
Oh,
yourself. And it's cool to have the chance to keep paying it forward. So, I'm just, thankful that we got to have you on here and got to learn from you a little bit today.
thank you. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Deemer.
Yeah, thank you, Coach. This was awesome, and wishing you the best this year. We'll be following and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.